Hello everyone, this is Vanessa Mayavir from Group 7 and my topic is about DOM manipulation. So first is we have to know what is DOM. Document Object Model or DOM is a programming interface for HTML and XML documents. It represents the page so that programs can change the document structure, style, and content. The DOM represents the document as nodes and objects. That way, programming languages can connect to the page. A web page is a document. This document can be either displayed in the browser window or as the HTML source, but it is the same document in both cases. The document object model represents the same document, so it can be manipulated. The DOM is an object-oriented representation of the web page, which can be modified with a scripting language such as JavaScript. So as you can see here, na ay basic HTML code, na ay head and title element, and so on and so forth. And what DOM does, it views this HTML document as a tree structure of objects. Like so. So first, we have the document object. This is the core or foundation of the DOM. To perform any form of DOM manipulation, you have to access the document object first. Next, we have the HTML root element, which is a child of the document object. Next on the line are the body and head elements, which are siblings to each other and children of the HTML element. Under the head element, we have the title element, which you can agree is a child of the head element and parent to the next node, my text, not text. So directly under the body element, we have two elements, a tag and h1 tag, which are siblings to each other and children of the body element. Finally, the href attribute and then text node, my link, are children of the a tag. Exactly the same way, the text node, my header, is a child of the h1 element. Now, this is a very simple tree structure of this HTML file. And nga nag-convert siya into node tree because DOM sees HTML elements as objects. That's why it's called Document Object Model. Document is the HTML or XML file. Object are the tags and elements within the file, and model is this structure. DOM represents the file as a tree structure. And all nodes can be accessed through this tree. Their contents can be modified or deleted, and new elements can be created. So moving on, the next question we have is how to select elements in the DOM. So syempre, kay mag-manipulate man tag elements, we need to know first unsaon pagkuha og access sa certain element. So there are 4 ways to select element in a DOM using selectors, and we're going to explain it one by one. Okay, first we have select element by ID, and this is the most common way to access an HTML element. Second, select element by tag name. Next, select element by class name. And lastly, we have selecting an element with CSS selectors. This one has 2 ways of selecting, and I'll be explaining it later. So, first, I'm going to show you how to select an element using an ID. So hopefully you know all about IDs. IDs are an attribute that we give to HTML elements to identify them and use on JavaScript to access and manipulate that certain element. So the value of the ID attribute must be unique within the HTML document. The syntax for ID is write a hash character followed by an ID name, then define the CSS properties within curly braces. Okay. And this is where we set that ID and ma-apply na dayon ni nga mga style sulod sa braces into our H2 element. And mo na din ni iyahang result. I mean output. Next, so here's where we're going to use the get element by ID selection to manipulate a web page. And as you can see, we have a button with the text try it and a p tag with an ID called demo. This would be the initial output of our sample HTML code. So the goal of this HTML page is to change the text here once you click the button. Right now, the button doesn't do anything yet when we click it. So in order for us to achieve our goal, we must first add some JavaScript codes to add some functionality to our whole web page, and that is where the DOM manipulation takes place. So first, we must add an onClick event here in our button tag to call and execute our function called myFunction once the button is clicked. Second is we must define the function we just called in our event inside our script tag, like so. The document here is a predefined object that represents a web page. So if you want to access an element in your HTML page, you must always start with accessing the document object. Next is the get element by ID. This is a DOM method which returns the first element, and that has the ID attribute which the specified value. Here we put demo inside the parentheses. What we are doing here is that we are trying to get the element in the web page whose ID is demo, and using the document object we are trying to identify which element has the same ID attribute and return its value as a JavaScript object which has predefined property inner HTML. The inner HTML here allows reading and replacing everything within the DOM element. So now we're going to change the text and set it to hello world. And this is the output after we click the button. So that is only the first way to select elements in the DOM. The next selection method is select element by tag name or get elements by tag name. I'm pretty sure we all know what tag is. Tags are these words or letter inside the angular brackets. And kining mga letters or something sa sulod mo na siya ang mag-present or mag-define sa unsay mo gusto buhaton within your web page. Say for example, gusto ka mag-add og paragraph. So isulod nimo siya within the opening and closing tag sa p element, and automatically i-display na niya sa imong web page with the specific size. Depende na lang din na nimo if gusto ba nimo siya i-modify. Okay, so here we have 3 different paragraph elements and also a button that has a click here text. So in this example, I'm just going to repeat the things I did earlier with our button. And right now, it is still not working as we haven't defined our function yet, and this would be its initial output. Again, we will have the same goal with this web page as earlier. So once we click the button, the style of each paragraphs should be changed. The difference between this and the get element by ID is that although we don't have to individually access each element to manipulate it. In this method, we can easily manipulate a collection of elements with the same tag name. So now we are going to define our function, and we'll start off by declaring a variable to store our paragraph elements. And as you can see, there is a document.getElements by tag name, and then inside the parentheses you can put any tag name that you want to manipulate. So atong example there is pman, so p atong ibutang sa sulod sa parentheses. So now you have access to every single p elements in your whole web page and manipulate it using an array. But first is I'm going to show you how to manipulate these elements individually. And as you all know, arrays can only be accessed using indexes, and it will always start with 0. That's why I put 0 here, and then so on. And as you can see, I have set different CSS styling properties in each of our paragraphs. We have set the first one to italic and changed the font of the second one and the third one to bold. And this would be its output once we click the button. Okay, so since manaman ta sa pag-manipulate individually, we will now use for loop to access all elements. Here I've added another variable, I, for the index, and then our for loop. And this time, we're going to change the background color of the text. So if we try to run it again and click the button again, this would be the final result. Okay, so next method is selecting an element through their class name. So class attribute, the class as attribute is often used to point to a class name in a style sheet. It can also be used by a JavaScript via the HTML DOM to access and manipulate elements with a specific class name. To create a class, write period, character, followed by a class name, then define the CSS properties within curly braces. So mura ra gyapon siya og ID, ang difference lang is ang class pwede daghan element and same og class name. Unlike IDs nga every element has to have their own unique IDs. So mo na din iyang result. So in this example, as you can see, naatay 6 different elements: heading, paragraph, div element, and anchor. So gituyo na ko ni og lahi-lahi to emphasize the difference between the get elements by tag name and get elements by class name. So same ra gyapon earlier ang function sa atong button. Inside our function, mag-set gihapon tag variable to store the collection of elements with the same class name. Atoan na pod gi-add ang class attribute sa mga elements with the value my class. And as you can see, ang isa ka paragraph element wala na ko gibutangan og class attribute. So mao ni siya ang difference sa get element by tag name and get elements by class name. Sa tag name, we can only access elements with the same tag, and whether we like it or not, tanan gyud ang imong ma-access. Say for example, daghan na ka P elements but naa kay ibilin nga 1 to 2 element nga lahion nimo ang style or leave it as it is. We can do that, but much easier lang if class name ra atong gamiton. Sa class, pwede raman nato dili but nga no class attribute ang certain element. Dili na necessary nga i-identify ang index atong element na di nimo gusto i-modify. Okay? So here, sa value sa atong variable, we have document.get elements by class name and the name of our class. Another variable for index, and then diri na dayon sulod sa atong for loop ang styles that we want pag i-click na nato ang button. And mao na dayon ni ang iyahang output. So now, do you see the difference between the two? Sa tag name, ang elements ra sharing the same tag ang imuhang ma-modify at once. There is a get elements by class name, pwede ra lahi ang tag name, and of course, pwede ra sa nato dili isulod sa class ang isa ka element. So it's like we manually select the elements we want to modify, which I think is much better compared sa previous one, right? So the last method is selecting an element by CSS selectors. CSS selectors are used to find or select the HTML elements you want to style. It is a pattern of elements and other terms that tell the browser which HTML elements should be selected to have the CSS property values inside the rule applied to them. So as I said earlier, this method has two ways. The query selector and query selector all. First, we have query selector. the query selector returns the first value that matches the selector given. This method can accept all CSS style selectors, allowing it to select by tag, class, or ID. So in this example, we're using class name and there are two elements sharing the same class, but the query selector only chooses and returns the first element it finds that matches the selector given. So here, makita na nato nga ang na-modify lang is ang heading because mao man ni ang first na nag-match. Okay, so moving on, we have the query selector all. This one works similar above, but ang difference lang is that this one returns a collection of elements that matches it. And now, ang tag name na sad ato ibutang sa selector. And mao ni siya ang initial output ani nga file. And when the button is clicked, this should be the outcome. Since P man ato gibutang sa selector, ang P elements are sad ang iyang gi-modify. So basically, it works just like get tag name or class name, but kanilang is it can work with all of them na dili na necessary na mo-switch pa ka from get element by ID to get element by tag name. Just simply change the selector. Okay, so that's the end of my topic for today. Now let's move on to the next report. Thank you.